let's talk about Wes Craven's New Nightmare, right? We already mentioned our thoughts on the franchise itself, but yeah, technically this is the last, or well, could have been the last of the Freddy movies, but we had that god-awful 2010 remake, right? But this was the last, technically the last Freddy film, I should say, Nightmare on Elm Street film to be made by
Freddy.
Wes Craven, right? And based off of how much you guys love this film and prefer this one over have this higher than the first one, I totally understand. But I feel like for me, I just need to rewatch it again and maybe I'll appreciate it a lot more, because I only saw this movie twice, right? The second time was in preparation for this, right? So for one thing, this is actually the longest Nightmare on Elm Street movie ever made, right? It clocks in at about 112 minutes, right?
It is.
And also it's the first Freddy movie, including the remake and Freddy versus Jason, to have its main credits pop up at the end of the movie. I thought that was really interesting, right? Just little minor tidbits, right? Great opening sequence though, with its visual callback to the intro of Nightmare on Elm Street, with Freddy playing on the razors in the boiler room. I love how it sets up the whole meta tone of it, because yes, what you're seeing here is a set, right? We're seeing a Freddy film being made, right? And one of the members of the crew members who handling VFX, it just so happens to be the husband, or fictional husband, of Heather Langenkamp, right? And that's one thing I always love about, that always blew my mind about this movie here, right? Is that Heather's basically playing herself. She's not playing Nancy, she's playing herself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so her husband,
husband.
Yeah, her husband Chase. Yeah, her husband Chase and son Dylan are fictional, but Heather is real. She's playing herself. I love that. So yeah, you were saying?
It's her real life husband though.
Really? You serious?
Well, he was in the movie. He was in the movie as well. Not in the role of her husband, but he was.
Yeah.
He was in the film. Yeah.
Oh, he was he one of the special effects guys? Because I know there were two guys who were working alongside Chase.
He is in real life. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
He was one of the special effects guys, but he worked on the special effects for the film.
Right. Okay.
As well.
Well, that makes sense.
As well. Yeah.
Yeah. There's this shot though where you see Chase explaining to those two guys about how to pull off the effect, right? And I swear, right, like one of the, you see like this prosthetics on this table, right? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's from the Dream Child, right? Because you see it's Freddy, but you're seeing a face coming out of it, and it reminds me of like when Freddy was pulling himself out of Alice near the end of that movie. I could be wrong, but I feel like that it's a reference to the Dream Child. I could be wrong, y'all could tell me, right? I love how Wes Craven, right, wastes no time in unsettling the audience, right? So you see this animatronic Freddy hand comes to life and he stabs a few of the crew members. Well, the same two guys as I mentioned before. Then the boiler room fire activates, and then Dylan, as in the son of Heather, suddenly walks onto this bed that's on the set, and then he disappears. And then Heather wakes up and there's this earthquake taking place. By the way, if you're the type of person who gets freaked out by earthquakes, you have to watch this movie. There's a lot of earthquakes in this movie.
Right.
A lot.
And I love the fact that there's this news report talking about, this series of earthquakes has been taking place and blah blah blah. You know what I mean? It's crazy, right? I like that we get a little taste of what audiences will get with the first Scream movie, when Heather's phone starts ringing right after the earthquake and she picks it up and it's like 1, 2, she hangs up, right? And then it rings again and she picks it up. It's like, Freddy's coming for you. And then she just drops it again, right? If I just have one gripe with the movie, maybe if I rewatch it, it will make much more sense. They never really explain, because she see how she just had this stalker call her and make all these calls, but they never really show who it is. And then also this, I assume, is the same person who was leaving like these Bible pages. I believe it's Bible pages, right? But each one has a letter on it. So they never really like stopped to explain who left those things, because it's all built around Freddy, tormenting her. But like, if it's a fan, why we didn't see the fan? If Freddy was compelled, like if it was, playing with the,
as meta as it is, I feel like it may have been a real life fan. Because there was also the movie does kind of play on the way people are obsessed with Freddy in the real world.
Yes.
And that's what's kind of giving him, that's what he wants, because that's what would give him his power.
Yes.
So I do feel like it may be, especially with so many real life actresses dealing with dangerous stalkers, So I do feel like it
He
probably,
was a
yeah.
stalker too, huh?
Sorry?
Had a long
Mm-hmm.
was dealing with a stalker too, in real
Really?
life.
Right.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
Wes
that doesn't
Craven used
surprise
that.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Sadly.
so
Yeah.
I just felt in retrospect we should have seen who the stalker was, right? Or if you want to
I get you.
connect
Yeah.
it to into the story, the conceit. Yeah, Freddie could have been compelling him to make these calls and leave these cryptic messages and whatever it is, right? You could have
Right.
shown that at
Right.
least, right? But whatever. There's a great
Good
moment.
idea, though.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
great moment where you see the actor himself, Robert Englund, shows up at this interview that Heather has, right? And he's in Freddy makeup. And you see, and it's Wes kind of accepting it too, because, I feel like it's something that he was kind of bogged down by, the whole idea of how big of a pop culture icon Freddy become, to the point that he's not scary anymore, right? So yeah, you see Robert in the audience, he's all like, yeah, you know what I mean, and showing off the clothes and making him one-liners, all that kind of stuff. And swear to God, right? For me, this was the first time I ever saw Robert without makeup. I've never seen his face up to that point. I don't remember him. Actually, don't remember him in any film at this time. I could.
V, you didn't see V? Remember, he was I think that his role in V actually came before his role in Freddy.
Okay.
V was before his role.
All right. So to be honest, I have not seen V since I was a kid, so I don't remember a lick of
I guess.
V.
Okay. So now that you're probably it's one of those things where you didn't know his face, and then you'll see the movie and be like, oh my God, that's Robert Englund.
Yeah. It's
So I
what
understand.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It happens to all
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah. Also, this was the first time that I have ever seen Robert Shea, because if you're familiar with the previous films, his name pops up as the producer, and I was like, hey, look, Robert Shea, like we actually seen him, right?
Yeah.
That was really cool.
That's the man who is Robert Shea. That's the name I can remember, who basically Wes argued with about the ending.
Yeah. And I love that he's the one who's pitching to Heather the whole idea of casting in a new Freddy movie, and that's why we learned that Wes Craven's the one who's writing it right now, right? So it's like I like that. I like that. Very, very meta as well, right? I like in a nice bit of writing here, you find out that Wes was inspired to make this Freddy follow-up, right? Because he at a point in time, he just wasn't having nightmares related to Freddy Krueger, but now all of a sudden he has them. So it's like, hey, cool, I want to do this, right? And I love that they mentioned that he stopped making horror films at this point. So because he's driven by these nightmares now, it's like, yeah, I wanna make horror films again. I like that. Very, very, winking at the camera and that kind of stuff, right? Now I can't remember if Freddy's Dead had one of these moments, because it's Freddy's Dead. I don't want to see that shit again. But yeah, this is yet another Freddy movie that has a funeral scene, because unfortunately, Chase gets killed. You know what I mean? And yeah, of course, Heather and Dylan have to attend the funeral. Had to attend the funeral. Sorry, I like that you see John Saxon as in the actor himself. R.I.P. Yeah, he shows up, as one of the attendees as well, right? But again, going back to earthquakes, boy, there's an earthquake in the middle of that, right? And I'm just there like, what the hell kind of place Heather decide to live in? Like all these like random earthquakes, though,
I think they do get a lot of earthquakes out in California. I can't remember where the movie's supposed to be.
Yeah, no, but the earthquake thing is a ambiguous thing, because she's living in an area that's earthquake prone, but each earthquake is Freddy trying to breach.
Yeah.
into the real world. Yeah.
So is that double? Yeah.
Right. So speaking of Dylan, right? Agree to disagree, right? He belongs in creepiest kids in horror movies list way. This dude is creepy, dread. He reminds me of he actually reminds me of Danny Torrance from The Shining. He have a Danny Torrance kind of vibe to him. Very quiet, very reserved, and he just do weird things, and then his mom like wondering what happened in there, right? So case in point, there's a moment where he's like muttering to himself while he watching the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie on TV, and then there's this Omen-like moment where he's standing on this tall platform at a playground and he jumps off, and then the mom, reluctantly, thankfully I should say, the mom saves him just in time before he hits the ground, right? And then she asks him if he's okay, and then he says, God won't take me.
That's the reason.
Like, that's creepy. Like, just that response, God won't take me. And what?
That the child got time off because she explained to him the night before that his father with God, right?
Yes.
And he was asking her if he need to be dead in order to see God, and she said she don't think so.
Yeah.
And it looked as though he get it into his head that if he climbed high enough, he would be able to reach heaven to see his father. You understand? So it's kind of a sad kind of thing if you think about it.
Okay.
Yeah, he was reaching up, and when he was trying to get to the highest point that he could get to, trying to reach heaven. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I just saw he was just being possessed. I just thought he was just being possessed and nothing more. I didn't know there was a context.
If you look at it again, he's reaching upwards to the sky and he kind of slips and loses his balance. So or something like that. So
Now on the subject of Heather and Dylan, right? This is one thing that I love about this movie, right? Where when it comes to slasher films, especially in the 80s, right? Like as much as I love the reviews of the late great Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, usually they kind of get these things wrong where they always feel like they're just too exploitative. It's always about teenagers getting killed, and it's all about the violence, man. But in this one, it's not just about teenagers being killed, right? It's about a mother trying to protect her family, right? And I love that, right? That it's just so organic, right? And it really shows the mature outlook that Wes had with this movie, right? Because the first one was just a bunch of teens getting killed, right? Because that was the nature of horror films back then. Now the stakes are bigger, right? The character, or I should say the lead from the first film is older now. She is a mother now, right? So all those moments really work to me. Just her trying to protect her kid.
I will say this, maybe I'm just being defensive as a horror fan, but I think the best horror movies, they were never just about teenagers getting killed. You had with Nightmare on Elm Street, you do have that sense of Wes also trying to, maybe it's like a metaphor for these towns that seem so perfect, with these beautiful homes and these well-off families, and they all have their dark underbelly. They all have messed up, not all, but some of them have these dark things going on within the families that nobody knows about. You have the alcoholic mother, you have the absentee father, you have parents never knowing what their kids are actually up to, never really paying attention until it's too late. So I do feel like that's an element of what he's trying to explore, as well as just doing it through the form of a slasher movie. That sort of thing.
Yeah. I agree. But it's just the illusion of, we just go in there just to see characters that you hate get killed,
On the surface, it's a bunch of kids getting killed,
Yeah. So again, just keep in mind that this is the second time I've seen this movie, right? So this is a great moment where Heather actually meets with Wes Craven himself, right? And that's where you get the whole meta-contextual approach to Freddy Krueger as the character of him in the movie, right? So basically, Freddy is held at bay by these films, right? So he's like a genie in a bottle, right? But since they stopped making these movies in 91 now, Freddy's looking for a way to return to the world itself, to the real world, right? So that's why he targets Heather, because she was the first one to humiliate him in the first film, right? In the final act of that, right? So Wes's duty, I'm going to call it duty here, is to write this new script, make this film, so Freddy will remain this fictional creature and not come out in the real world and kill people, right? But it ultimately rests on Heather to choose whether she wants to play Nancy one more time or deal with him by herself in the real world here. I love how that particular sequence ends now where you see a shot of Wes's computer and everything he said at that point was already written. I see the very end, you see feet are black and you show feet are black. I was like, yep, that's how you do meta. I love it.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. In retrospect, though, I feel like this was what the Matrix Resurrections was trying to do, where it was treating the original trilogy as, that's a fictional thing, but this movie here is a reflection of the fictional thing. So it's like the story of the Matrix in the real world, and this is how it would play out. I feel like that was what Resurrections was trying to do, right? But the problem is that the director didn't even want to make the show in the first place. Wes wanted to make New Nightmares, so that's why it feels more organic, right? But of course, you can nitpick and say, that don't really make any sense because blah, 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 blah. But, I don't think that's what Wes is going for. It's not meant to be 100% logical, right? It's just supposed to work in the context, in the framing of what he's trying to get at here, right? things really ramp up in the last 45 minutes or so, right? This is where Heather heads to the hospital because, her son had this epileptic bout, basically, right? So he ends up being hospitalized, right? There's a scene though where she dreams of him being where she dreams Dylan getting possessed by Freddy, and then he spurts out projectile vomit at her, right? And I should mention too, there's like these subtle nods to classic horror films though. I really like that about this movie. So like that, for example, that's Exorcist stuff. You saw a little bit of Psycho near the end of the movie where you see Dylan pull out grab a knife and hear the ting ting ting. So there's these little callbacks, these little tributes to classic horror films. I love that, right? But for me though, the truly terrifying moment in this whole movie for me though is where Dylan sees his babysitter Julie get killed right in front of him, Dread. And he's the only one seeing Freddy, right? So similar to Tina in the first film, Julie's not seeing who's like stabbing her and dragging her up the wall and on the roof now. But it's the fear you see in Dylan's face, Dread, that makes this scene so effective, right? And prior to all that, right, like Freddy just doing his thing here, right? But here's where it's like, yeah, Freddy's still an asshole. He still like to torment people. The man like watch the kid and say, "You ever played Skin the Cat?" I was like, wow, but like Freddy, boy, you just hate this guy so much, boy. But yeah, that scene to me is the most effective in the whole film. Agree to disagree?
No, it is really and truly, and it's tragic because it's like, oh God, poor Julie. She didn't do anything to deserve that horrible death,
Yeah.
And like I said, it's super traumatizing. That child is supposed to represent a 6-year-old child. That child will, after dealing with Freddy, will need a psychologist.
Yeah.
So traumatizing.
Yeah.
And seeing all this blood and oh God.
No. Speaking of Freddy, right? I love the sort of alterations you give, like the new design of him. In the sense that, like, especially with the hand in particular, like the blades look a lot sharper. But I like that they have these white bone-like additions to the back of the hand, and even on Freddy's face, there's like a bit of white in it. So it's almost as if it's kind of meant to show like the makeup process, but instead of like doing makeup on a live face, it's almost like you're doing makeup on a skeleton, like a skull. That's how his face kind of looks like a mixture of bone, but flesh, but also the burned flesh too. It's a weird design, but I like it. It makes, and it looks different from what we saw from him in the other films, right? But I think it works. I will say it takes a while for you to get used to it. He really does not look like how he looked like in the last films, right? In the previous films, but it works. I think it works.
Yeah, I do feel like it's my favorite Freddy look. I'll be honest with you. Because
organic.
He seems he seems so much meaner. He's almost like a Cenobite from Hellraiser. Where, it's more demonic looking than before, and that sort of thing.
Very menacing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's what I like about it.
Yeah, and just when you thought that scene with Julie's death was really messed up, though, is when you see Dylan sleepwalking through a freeway, a busy freeway, just to get home. Boy, I'm like, God damn! And then you just see Freddy still being an asshole, manifesting himself in the clouds, and then he pick him up with the razor hand and dangling him. Freddy, you asshole. Why would you do this, Jen? Why would you do this?
Yeah.
And of course, Heather, Jordan, just seeing the fear in her face because she's trying to save this kid. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, right? What the argument I'll make about this show here is that compared to like the recent films, this one really feels like a psychological horror, in my opinion, right? It really plays on none of this. Nothing about Freddy being here or tormenting, Heather or her family or whatnot. None of this should happen, and yet it is. And the question is how and why, right? I love that. And it's very cerebral as well, too. It's always about, is Heather dreaming or is she just, mentally troubled or something? And then they add a little bit of subplot where maybe the kid adopt that from the mother. So these little things I love about this movie. That's what makes it so different, right? And you really see it here too, where she goes back home, right? Well, right after the whole freeway scene, and John is there, right? And then, well, before John leaves, he calls her Nancy. And then this is around the time, this is where Freddy comes into the real world, right? Well, kinda, right? I say kinda because when Nancy calls John dad before he drives off now, you hear the theme song, the same one from the first film, and then she looks back at the house and it's the same house from the first movie. I'm like, what?
1428, yeah.
Yeah, 1428. I'm like, what? This real hard, right?
You realize there's a line that Heather Langenkamp says is like repeating the line from the first film, and that line is like the key, like the switch to flick the to make that Freddy realm and the reality mesh into one another.
Right.
Freddy did it.
Yes. I didn't pick up on that.
Freddy did it.
Yeah.
And then he said, yeah, sure. That it mimics the conversation that she was telling her father on the phone in the first one, that Freddy killed Glenn.
Yes.
And he had the same reaction. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And that's where he switches from being John to her father.
Yes, exactly. The final act of this film takes us back to that good old surrealness that for me, I always loved about the franchise, right? Where, especially with the chamber, this really hellish chamber where Freddy's in, right? And where he captures, where he has Dylan captive, right? Heather dukes it out with Freddy, and because his New Line Cinema back in the 90s, Freddy's death is so over the top with his head contorted into like this devil with horns, and then it blows up, and then the whole place blows up. Like, it's so over the top though, but it works in a sort of good triumphing over evil kind of thing, right? The ending is fantastic in my opinion, right? So this is where Heather receives the first draft of the script, right, that Wes was writing, right? And the last page, what was written down is that Dylan asked Heather to read it. And then Dylan in the real world asks her to read it, and then she does so, right? But it connects to a scene that occurred earlier where he had asked her to read this fairy tale to her, right? To him. I think it's Hansel and Gretel, I believe it was, right? Yeah. And the idea with this though, this is what blew me away about this movie, right? When it was wrapping up, is that these films, or at least this film, right, could be viewed as a fairy tale. It could be viewed as just, good versus evil, like human being has to face the fear and stop this monster and return home, right? So of course the movie's not telling you to go online and download Nightmare on Elm Street scripts and read it to your kids. That's not what they're saying, right? But the idea is that the legacy of Freddy will live on even when there are no more movies. And seeing that this is Wes Craven's last Freddy movie and this is his farewell to the franchise, it makes a lot of sense. So it's really, really heartfelt when you think about it too, right? It gets even better, right? Because, the legacy of Freddy has lived on, right? Especially when it's Halloween time. There's numerous film screenings and marathons based on Nightmare on Elm Street movies, right? And old and new generations can watch these movies and enjoy them for the entertainment value, right? And even more importantly now, the characters of those films become like mythical, right? Whether it's Nancy or Kirsten or Alice, they become fairy tale characters in a sense. Like we'll always talk about how Nancy stopped Freddy in the first film and all that kind of stuff, right? And going back to Wes now and his history with the horror film genre, it kind of shows that, horror movies can be more than just gratuitous exploitative films, right? Like what they were accused of like in the 80s, right? Oh, it's just schlocky and it's all about violence against women and all that kind of stuff. They can actually tell great and compelling stories. And just the mere fact that Wes made that, it's basically a great message that's being told here, right? And rather prophetic one too, coming from Wes Craven, right? I love that, this is the final film that he puts out and then he transitions now into a brand new franchise that will be Scream. So I love that. It's just him kind of giving this hearty farewell to the franchise that he helped build, even though he didn't really work on the subsequent sequels. He just worked on the first one and what is technically the final entry in that, because, the 2010 remake don't matter. And, well, Freddy vs. Jason is what it is, right? So fun fact, right? Near the end of the end credits, right? We see the following. Some parts of this motion picture were inspired by actual events. Others may be attributed to the overactive imagination of a 5-year-old boy. I like that. Like, it's still sticking with the meta vibe of the movie itself, right? It's a nice little joke, winking at the camera and that kind of stuff, right? So, in closing, I could understand why, Alicia and you, Summer, I could understand why you prefer this one, why you all think this is the best of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, right? But for me, I feel like if I just watch it over a couple more times, then I will really appreciate it, right? It's just the first one is near and dear for me because of when I first saw it and how I felt seeing the deaths and hearing the music and all that kind of stuff, right? But this one feels like this hearty farewell to the franchise, right? Just a guy who created it in a different place in his life. He's mature now. He's seen the world differently. So he approaches the material a lot differently, right? I love the meta take on things. I feel like this is him kind of experimenting with that style before he would go all in with it with Scream, you know what I mean, and have fun with it. And most importantly, I just love how real the stakes were, right? It's a mother trying to protect her child, seeing that her husband died in like this terrible way, right? The mother-son dynamic really, really works here, right? And for me, Heather Langenkamp gives probably the best performance I've seen for her, right? Then again, I've only seen her in this and two other films that will be the first and third Freddy movies, so I'm sorry, right? I know that she mentioned that she acted in TV shows and whatnot, but I've not seen her in anything outside of this franchise. I'm sorry, y'all could tell me where she appeared in, right? Or whatever. But just that dynamic works though. It's very Shining inspired, which is fine because I love Shining. That's my all-time favorite horror movie, but it works, right? And it just shows the mature outlook into the franchise, right? Something that became part of pop culture and, at first was kind of associated with seeing kids get killed, right? Now it's something more integral, right? And I love that Wes frames it as almost like a modern fairy tale in a sense, right? It's good triumphing over evil. I love that. I love when good triumphs over evil, even in horror films, right? So yeah, again, this is a show that I feel like if I rewatch it, I will appreciate a lot more. But for what it's worth, yeah, I think it works, right? So forgive me for the rating, guys. Like the decent 4 out of 5, man. I think that this show absolutely works, right? And I think like just as a farewell to the franchise, yes, it's great. It's a shame that, excluding Freddy vs. Jason, that was what it was. But that in particular just kind of shows why the 2010 remake just didn't need to exist. And still doesn't need to exist in my opinion. Because the series is done. You don't need to continue it further unless you're doing one-time films like Freddy vs. Jason, something like that. No, but the franchise was already done. There was no need to revive it like that, right? But it is what it is. But yeah, this is a solid entry. And again, just as a conclusion to this series, yeah, it works. So yeah, Alice, your final thoughts and rating.
Yeah, so like I said, it is my favorite film of the franchise, and I agree with you that there is no necessity to do the 2010 film. I enjoyed the movie for what it was, and the fact that Wes returned to kind of bring closure to himself about the character and bring it back to where he wanted it to be, which was like in the original one, a more menacing, scary, evil character, which he did successfully. And like you said, there's a level of maturity for him, and then the main actress coming back as well too. And I think it would appeal to older horror fans, for want of a better word, And like you said, there are a lot of underlying metaphors and lessons to take from the film itself. It really is, in my word, one of the best horror films ever made. And like I said, that is why Wes Craven, rest in peace, was my favorite horror director of all time. And I would give it a 9 out of 10.
Wow. Like I feel just based off the both of y'all glowing reception over this movie, I feel like if I just watch it one more time, I'll probably love it. I'll probably love it a little bit more. Yeah. But yeah, Summer, close things off now. Yeah, your final thoughts and rating on Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
For me, it's that, same thing you guys talked about, but tapping into that ending and the cyclical nature of making these franchises. I feel for me, that's what I got. This movie works on two levels in that it gives us back a Freddy that we could be terrified of. It rips away all the camp and all the nonsense that built up over the years. and got back to the core of who Freddy Krueger was and is and what he means to fans of the franchise. But it's also so meta. I think it almost lays the groundwork for a movie like Scream. That's probably where Wes Craven would get that idea for that. The meta nature of Scream would come from, in that this movie, like I said, the cyclical nature of franchises is that you try to get away from doing the same thing over and over again. And here we are with this movie ending with them reading that quote unquote fairy tale all over again, almost giving power to something you just destroyed. you know? So it has so many brilliant takeaways in terms of the way these characters, when you make something that becomes as iconic as the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, how it affects you no matter what you try to do afterwards. And that applies to Heather Langenkamp, Wes Craven, Robert Englund. How these movies, no matter where Robert Englund goes, no matter the fact that he's a theater trained actor and he has so much range. When you ask somebody, what do you know Robert Englund from, they're going to say Nightmare on Elm Street. But I think that's why I love this movie so much, is because of the fact that when I first saw it, it gave me Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. But and you watch it again and it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much of this the meta stuff that's going on here, on what it means to create a character like this and what it does to you in your life, how it could almost become its own demonic force, so to speak, that follows you wherever you go. It's just brilliant on all those levels, and I think that's why I love it so much. Add to that the love of practical effects that is still very much alive in this 1994 movie. And for me, yeah, from a franchise point of view, it's a 9 out of 10 for me as well.